All right, we are opening doors, letting everybody in. So hopefully you're starting to be able to hear and see us, and things are opening up the way that they should be. But I wanted to say a quick good afternoon and welcome to today's ATI member education facilitated by govmates. We're going to dive into all of the good stuff about building strong teams for OTA consortia opportunities here in a minute, but I did want to kind of give you the lay of the land before we get started. I am your event host. My name is Meg O'Hara, and I am the GovMates Director of Engagement, and I'll be monitoring the Q&A and facilitating some of the questions and that sort of thing for today's discussion. For those of you who may not know GovMates, we are a technology scouting platform connecting small and non-traditional businesses with system integrators and agencies who are seeking innovative solutions to their biggest challenges. And we provide matchmaking, education, resource introductions, and more for ATI and our ecosystem. So let us see if we can get this moving here. Going to give you a few participation reminders and a reason to possibly go have some lunch if you haven't already. If this is the first time you're joining us, make sure you move some of those distractions. So close down any unnecessary browser windows, silence your phone, use headphones so that we're not shouting across the office to your office mates. We do encourage you to be active in the chat. You should see a chat box and a Q&A at the bottom of your screen. If you'll click on the chat box and then say to everyone, or whatever option that is to chat to everybody, you can give that chat box a test run to make sure that you can see and hear us. Otherwise, only I'm going to be able to see it if you don't choose everyone. Say hello, let us know that you can hear us. And then we will be taking audience questions throughout the discussion. So if something is relevant to the group at large, we'll make sure to touch on it. If your question is a little bit more nuanced and it might need a bigger discussion, we'll make sure to connect with you post-event via email, and we will make sure that you can connect with our presenter, or if you need something from GovMates, we can do that as well after the presentation is concluded. And then finally, we are recording. She should have told you nice and loud that you were joining a recording here, and the replay will be available post-event once it processes. You should see that within the next 24 hours. If you don't see it by tomorrow afternoon, send an email to ati@govmates.com and we will get you the link to that right away. And so today, this is right where I get to introduce our presenter for the afternoon. And I wanted to, make sure that you have a chance to get to know her a little bit. This is Dr. Dolores Kuchina-Musina, CEO and founder and tell me, I always say this part wrong. I always say, because I want to say REXOTA. Is that right?
REXOTA.
REXOTA. See, it's every single time.
It's okay.
REXOTA Solutions LLC. So Dolores, if you wouldn't mind starting us off and giving us a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. No, first off, thank you so much for having me today. Really excited about this, and I know this topic is hot and heavy, especially in the last 6 months with all of the executive orders that have come out and the memos. So like doing a refresher baseline for everyone, it's always good. My background, if for the audience, for those that don't know me, my claim to fame is I am the second person ever to write a dissertation on other transaction authorities. So I did a quantitative analysis. Dr. Crane is the first one to write it, and he did a legal perspective of it. So I have worked in the contract field for almost 20 years, from commercial all the way to international, in helping not only understand what the traditional pathways are for contracts, but also what are some of the non-traditional methods like other transaction authorities and other statutes or regulations that might exist worldwide, and how to leverage that across the world. So yes, I'm a nerd. Yes, I read all the boring stuff that no one else wants to read. So prepare for full nerdom today as we dive into one of my favorite topics.
And I think you are also, if you didn't mention it, an author of your own right.
Oh, yes, yes. Published a book last year called Public Procurement for Innovation. Yeah, so that was very exciting. Potentially maybe working on another publication next year, so we'll
Oh,
see.
that is secret information that we appreciate that you
Yes.
shared. I should have been more prepared and grabbed, because I do have a copy of your book, so should have been prepared and grabbed that, but can definitely say that I have a nice a gorgeous copy of that on my own as well. So I appreciate that you shared that. And thank you so much for being here today. And you are exactly the right kind of, as you called yourself, a nerd. We are all nerds of something. You're the right kind of nerd for today's discussion. We're going to go through a couple of things, some basics, key principles and legal framework, some of the no goes and no goes when it comes to OTAs, what things apply, what things do not. And then again, time for your questions. So if you have a question that, like I said, is relevant to the discussion we're having at that moment, please throw it into the Q&A or the chat box. Otherwise, we will have space for those at the end as well. So I'm actually going to turn it directly over to you, Dolores, and let you kind of take the reins here, and would love to hear a little bit about, how we're making the way for new opportunities and teaming.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. And I'll let you know when to switch slides and things like that. But no, thank you. So we thought that it would be really important to kind of just start from the very beginning to get everyone familiar, and kind of set this record straight. So basics for other transaction authorities, the reason why they exist is because what the government needed was a flexible way to do business with industry and companies that don't generally want to do business with the government. As many of you know, if you're in the innovation space, the government is not always the easiest client to work with. There's compliance requirements, and the federal acquisition regulations, even though they've only been around for the last 40 years, they haven't always been as friendly for commercial firms or for firms that are not necessarily set up from day one to work with the government. So the legend of other transaction authorities is that they originated from the Space Act. NASA was the first one. So when NASA was enacted, they also got the first authority for other transaction authorities. A little tidbit and fun fact, NSF had an authority for other agreements. They were not titled other transaction authorities at the time, just other arrangements in the early 1950s. So they don't get full credit, but I do like to throw that out there because they were technically, from my research, the very first to use the concept of the other as we hear it. But even before the federal acquisition regulations, there was a need for something that was more flexible, that did not require to have to be subject to the regulations that each agency had, because the problem existed even back then. It existed to have some way to leverage what is out there in the world in order for the government to benefit from all the new technology, all of the new ideas that were coming to the forefront. So primarily, I will say that what we hear about when we hear about other transaction authorities isn't actually NASA. We hear it from the Department of Defense side because they're the cool kids in school. They have the biggest budget. They're generally, the defense departments are the ones that help lead innovation because they're very mission driven in every single country. So when we look at other transaction authorities, what you might hear is a baseline of what Department of Defense is doing, not necessarily what other agencies are doing. There are currently over 50 authorities that exist that are other transaction authorities, and the list keeps growing. I'm actually updating the study me and Ben McMartin have done on the comparative study and uncovering more and more that have happened over the last 2-3 years. But the Department of Defense is the one that gets the most attention. So whenever you're listening to webinars, podcasts, reading materials, make sure that you're baselined as to what that statute actually says, because Department of Defense is one of the most prescriptive authorities, meaning it has the most requirements, while others like NASA are very simple, where it just says you can use other transaction if it's not a grant or cooperative agreement. So you can see that the flexibility is there. The other thing that is really a key driver here is to make sure that the agreement itself is set up in a way that allows for government and for industry to work in a more collaborative manner, meaning it is supposed to set up a relationship very different from what the federal acquisition regulations state, which is a cooperative agreement, or a cooperative relationship, meaning it's very transactional. Not the same as cooperative agreement, but it's supposed to be very transactional. It's the government buying something from you. While other transactions are supposed to have the type of arrangement between industry and government that is very flexible, you are talking to each other. You are able to update the milestones. You are able to update the schedule. You're able to work with a team that's able to provide the technical capabilities that are required. And that is the beauty of them. The beauty of them is that they're tailored to help support innovation, which is not linear. Innovation is not a set process that you don't go back and reiterate and repeat and look back at it, as many of you know. Especially if you've even supported a science fair project for your kids, there's always a redesign that happens in the middle of it, or maybe you need a new poster board because everything changed. So, this is where the beauty of other transactions really is it allows for that. Okay, next slide. Key principles and legal framework. What's important here is that the basics of what procurement best practices still apply to other transactions, but they are not subject necessarily to federal acquisition regulations, which have very prescriptive rules and regulations that apply for what we call traditional procurements. So what you'll hear me say a lot in this webinar and just overall is traditional procurements. When we talk about that, we're talking about FAR, federal acquisition regulation type contracts. When we're talking about non-traditional, we're talking about the type of agreements, and there's a distinction there because we want to say a different term for the type of legal document that's being exchanged between the two parties to differentiate between what is subject to the FAR and what is not subject to the FAR. Because if you've been in this space, and maybe some of you haven't, a lot of words really carry a lot of heavy weight when we talk about FAR-based contracts. So we try not to use the same language when we talk about other transactions to help keep that separation so that, nobody brings in the FAR or the supplements into OTs to keep the beauty there the way that it's intended to do. The basics here is that every single other transaction authority does have a statute. So you have to get familiar with reading the US code. If there is no statute for that authority, then that means that that agency does not have one. So there are several agencies that have been working for a very long time for their own authority, but it takes time because Congress has to approve it. So rule of thumb is if you are wanting to get started with a specific agency, make sure you know what their statute is, make sure you can find it, and make sure you read it. Because, for example, the Department of Defense prototype statute, which is 10 USC 4022, that gets changed almost on an annual basis or updated on an annual basis through the NDAA, which is the National Defense Acquisition Act. So every single year there's some kind of update to it. And a lot of people don't catch it. I read the NDAA every year, which I know a lot of people don't have an appetite for that. And I specifically look for those updates because sometimes they're major, sometimes they're minor. And 2 years ago, for example, in the NDAA, 4022 got updated to include a construction a pilot program, which was extended last year in order for the government to test if the prototype authority can be expanded into updating military installations. So for construction work, which if you're in the construction world, this has been a need for a very long time to see if stuff like this can be applied within the Department of Defense. The other thing is, and when we go to the other slide, this will make a little bit more sense, but there are still laws that apply to OTs. But generally, when we talk about other transactions, we're talking about what they are not what they are, because there's a lot more things that do not apply to them that we traditionally, when we work on traditional procurement contracts, think of when it comes to government contracting. And if we can go to the next slide.
Really quickly before we go to the next one, question from me. Because you enjoy, if that's the right word, reading that, annual refresh of the code and things like that, is there a place that you can also go, or do you write something where it's like, hey, here are the things that have changed that you need to know of? Is there like a quick hit sort of thing, or do we have to go and actually read that sector every single time? Or is there somewhere where it's like, hey, here are the changes that have been made, like cliff notes for the code?
So there are cliff notes on the NDAA that Congress puts out, but it's generally not the cliff notes like that. They're mostly focused on budget and what programs are being pushed out. If you follow me on LinkedIn, every year I will post a brief summary, and it's very specific to OTAs or commercial software or commercial companies that applies for. That's what I really look for. But I dig into a lot of it, of how it can be flowed down, even when it comes to traditional procurements as well. So fast and easy one is call a friend. I'll be that friend that you can dial into, and I'll be happy to help. So
Awesome. I was hoping that was going to be an answer. So thank you
yes.
for letting me put you on the spot.
Yeah, no problems at all. And I see Katie's question, so I'll answer that while I'm going through the slide as well, so that we get that addressed, because I'm sure other people have the same question.
Thank you.
So what does not apply to other transaction authorities is everything that you see listed here. I get a lot of questions of why SECA or Competition and Contracting Act does not apply. It does not apply because it's operationalized in the FAR and DFARs. So if you go a couple bullets down, you will see the FAR and the DFARs does not apply. Truth and Negotiations Act, that pesky cost accounting system that we all hate, does not apply. Procurement protest process. Now, this one I have here because I know it's a controversial topic. Generally, the protest process does not apply to OTs for the same reasons that you would do under a traditional procurement. Generally, the question that comes up with protests that go for OTs is going to be, was OT or other transaction the appropriate vehicle or the appropriate award instrument being used for the type of work? If you're following protest news like I am, you will know that the latest protest that happened a couple months ago puts a little bit of a damper into some of the previous decisions made when it comes to the venue. But aside from that question, the statute has already been updated for all other protests. So if you're still living in the big loud process that happened with Oracle, that's already been accounted for in the statute. That's already been accounted for in the guide. So Congress is very, very aware of what the protests are, what are the questions, what are the clarifications that are needed, because it is not new that OTs are the preferred method. It is something that has been in the NDAA since 2016, I believe, as early as that, as a preferred method. So they want you to use it. They want to make sure that you're leveraging it. The other piece that does not apply that I think is really important for everyone to know is there's a lot of question when it comes to intellectual property, how to protect my patent, how to protect my data rights, things like that. You will be negotiating, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, but you will be negotiating all of your intellectual property rights like you would be if you were negotiating in the commercial world, just with the government. So all those assertion tables that you're used to based on the DFARs or the definitions of what technical data or non-technical data, it does not necessarily translate into an OT because the FAR and the DFARs do not apply to OTs. So when you're using that terminology, this is where you have to be very careful to make sure you're not using the same terminology that has very heavy weight in the traditional procurement world. To answer Katie's question, when it comes to the FAR rewrite, and if we're going to see less usage, we will see a lot more usage when it comes to OTs. With the FAR rewrite, what I want just to cover just really quick, because I know we want to stay on OTs, but the FAR has always preferred commercial products and services. If you have read FAR Part 1, which I know is like the prelude, no one reads the prelude to any book, but it says in there that the government has to, currently it says this, the government has to have a preference for commercially available products and services. The biggest difference that is happening in the rewrite right now is that instead of you having to have a commercial items determination, the government is saying now you will always have commercial prioritized, and the waiver or documentation that you need is to justify why you're not going commercial. So instead of the way that it was reversed in the current version of the FAR. So what we're going to see is a higher push for people to use commercial, and depending on how the statute for the other transaction authority is written, to leverage that more, to make sure that they're getting the new novel, whatever the government needs in order for them to help fund the work based on what the statute says. And it's not always just the way that the Department of Defense outlines it. Research and development has a very broad definition when it comes to other agencies. So Department of Defense has a clear definition of what a prototype is, but it's not always that clear when it comes to other statutes. So that's why my rule of thumb is, if you're planning to work with a specific agency, read what the statute says for that agency, because that'll give you most of the answers, and then look for the appropriate guide that agency might have published. Like Department of Defense has two guides, one for 10 USC 4021 and one guide for 10 USC 4022 that were both published in 2023. So you want to make sure that you're staying on top of it. All right, next slide.
I do have another question that you
Oh,
may hit on later, but if you don't, we can do it now. So I just want to bring your attention to it.
yeah,
Somebody had asked, where do MTAs fit into this? I know they're not the same thing, and some people confuse like the MTA like middle, I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's the middle tier acquisition, right? How does
yeah.
that fit into an OTA? My understanding is that an MTA is um a what's it called? OTA is a tool in the toolbox, possibly for the MTA world, but how do those kind of fit into one another, or are they normally mutually exclusive?
I would say generally, so tool in the toolbox is a great analogy. MTA is really positioned to solve the one problem that we've had since inception of how do we make the government more of an appealing customer. So middle tier was brought in after, after FAFSA back in 1992, 1994 timeframe to help expedite the process that we bring in commercial tech. So where OTs fit in, especially on Department of Defense, is for them to be that tool to help expedite the process, because depending on who the workforce is in that contract shop, they're going to have a preference and they're going to want to work one way or another. And I have been there where I'm like, hey, this is below the simplified acquisition threshold. We should be able to chop and get this done. And they go, we don't do that here. We're going to do this as an IDIQ. And I'm like, I don't know why we're doing that, but okay. And that's just human nature. It's not wrong or right. It's just what the preferences of that office. People have preferences. I have my preference for OTs, and I shout it loud and proud. I know that's the way that I am, but that doesn't mean that I don't love the federal acquisition regulations. Now, one thing with middle tier acquisition, this is being spotlighted again this year with some of the current policy and memorandums that we're seeing. I expect there to be changes to this. So I want to be cautious of giving any kind of recommendations when it comes to this. I will say I don't see any huge changes to the current statutes we have for OTs, other than the minor tweaks that we generally see from every NDAA. I don't see like a huge shift for Department of Defense to like cut half of the section out or anything like that. I'm not foreseeing that. What I do see is everything that is FAR based, like middle tier acquisition is part of it is FAR based. There's going to be changes, and we just have to be prepared for it and understand how to translate that and operate in that world. And big news to everyone, government's going to have to do the same thing. So right now, government is trying to figure out what's on the other side of this FAR overhaul for us to expect, and how do we make sense of all these memorandums as well. So it's not just an industry problem, it's an all-around problem.
It sounds like a lot of soup that we're working through, but that's okay.
Yes.
We will get there.
Yes. All right, so what does apply to other transactions? Again, it is not lawless. It is not the wild, wild west. I hate when people say that, because you're still following all the processes that come in play to the procurement world. So if you look up procurement process or procurement planning, it's going to look very familiar to you. You know, it's how you buy. For example, you're not going to be looking at breaking criminal laws when you're trying to write a contract with the government. They're going to make sure that they have the proper authority for them to issue a contract for what they're doing. Fiscal law still applies to OTAs. NIST requirements apply to OTAs. CMMC does not, because it's a DFARS situation, but NIST does. So you have to make sure you understand the nuances there. And I know I brought in a negative term, CMMC, so I'm sorry, we're trying to stay positive today. But there's a reason why we want to make sure that we're very clear as to what applies and what does not, because there is a lot of misconception. And I think there will be a lot of clarifications that will happen, at least in the next year, once the FAR overhaul is complete, of what's going to happen with OTs and how that's going to clarify what's in the FAR, what's not in the FAR. And what's going to end up happening with these buying guides and the supplements. So I waiting on bated breath here too with all of you. Hopefully they'll have it done by the end of this fiscal year. But we'll see. But just want to make sure I highlight that it's not the wild, wild west. There's still rules. You still have to understand FOCI or foreign involvement or foreign ownership in your firm. import-export control still applies. So whether you're government or industry on this call, become friends with your lawyers, the ones that understand procurement law. Be besties with them, okay? They are going to be your guide to make sure that you understand what applies and what doesn't apply as you negotiate or as you craft these agreements.
And if you need somebody who's not your nephew to do your law type of work, we do have several firms that we partner with and that we are happy to do an introduction to. If there's somebody we're like, hey, I think I need to update that a little bit, happy to make that introduction should you need it. I also see a note in here that somebody says we love CMMC, so not necessarily a bad word. So wanted to make sure I shouted that note out as well.
No, I saw it. I mean, I know most of us love the idea of CMMC, but we love to hate it too. So there's plenty of really good memes when it comes to when it comes to anything that comes to compliance.
You are not wrong at all.
All right, I see a question from Mark. I
Yes.
feel like Meg, this one is a good one for you, and I'm happy to jump in and
Yes,
supplement as
perfect.
well.
So this is where we kind of open it up. I have several questions that I kind of want to throw at Dolores here. But I do know that Mark did ask one here that was talking about, hey, we're an ATI member. We don't feel like we're necessarily using the services to their fullest extent. How do we get more value? And how do we actually get to a place where we can come in contact with the potential customers to get funded through an OTA? Like, what are the next effective steps? And one of the things that we highly recommend is to be engaged, which I know is so kind of broad to say, but there are so many different opportunities that ATI provides. Industry days, that's where you're going to find, what's going on, who they're meeting, who they're talking to, what is it that what the requirements that are coming out, where are they looking to head, those sorts of things. Any of those events are a great way to interact and actually get in front of some of those people. Sometimes they do one-on-ones at those industry days as well, which might be a good opportunity. There are networking opportunities. There are matchmaking events. We actually have one that I will mention a little bit later as well. On July 10th, we're doing a virtual matchmaking, which means that you can join from anywhere as long as you've got a Wi-Fi hookup in your computer. So being in a space there, we're matching individuals with primes and integrators who need their services, so capabilities matched there, as well as member meetings. These are places that the government is invited. So you've got government, industry, academia, they all gather. So it's a great opportunity to kind of meet and team and find new prospective customers. And there is also that level of education that some of the clients may need. If you have a relationship with somebody a potential client or customer who doesn't necessarily know about the world of OTs or how they can get involved or how they could potentially, bring something to the table, having that conversation and doing a little bit of that education, or at least bringing somebody in from the ATI team or our team to have that conversation and say, hey, here's another opportunity, another vehicle, another avenue that you could potentially use to get things in your hands faster. That's also a conversation that's good with some of your existing customers that could help to lead to more opportunities. So any of those kind of ways to get better value. So really staying in touch and making sure that you have everybody's emails from ATI whitelisted. Make sure they're always coming through, they're not going to your other stuff. So I also have another question that says, what about foreign-owned companies? FOCI, is that still required?
Yes, that's still required. What you will find too with some solicitations that you will see for OTs if they're agency specific is you'll see the same type of form that you may see if you're doing the Small Business Innovation Research Program or SIBR program, where you have to identify if you are foreign owned. This is a big concern, especially for Department of Defense and for grant money. So depending on what kind of money you're going after, this is going to be something that you're going to have to make sure that you're aware if you're foreign owned, how you're set up, what applies to you. If you're a subsidiary or if you're funded by a venture capitalist firm, make sure you know and you can trace, because if this is one that you mess up, there's big repercussions and you won't be able to get any government funds if they do find out that you're foreign owned and that you applied. So Congress has been a huge stickler on this. Where again, Dolores's opinion is on this is for some small companies and new researchers, it's very hard to determine, especially with private equity firms, as to who actually owns them. So if you're planning to accept money or if you're currently in discussions with private equity, make sure you get that answer from them and you have a very solid answer of how you can trace it down as well if you're planning to go after OTs or SIBRs or something that uses those funds.
Perfect. I also see another question that says, say that somebody has a small defense tech company, what are the specifications that make an organization a non-traditional?
Great question. So you can find the definition for a non-traditional defense contractor under 10 USC 3014. And what I will tell you is after you read it, you will realize that about 96% of all companies are non-traditionals. And that's because the way that the definition is written is that it applies to all companies that within 12 months of the solicitation method have not had a contract with Department of Defense or the applicable agency if they're leveraging the same definition that is subject to full CAS or cost accounting standards. And a lot of companies don't get full CAS anymore. If you have full CAS, you will know you have full CAS. A lot of times people will have modified CAS, which is not applicable, and it's based on the solicitation date and 12 months prior to that. So that status may change. If you want to check, what I usually recommend for companies is to check one, if you're new to the organization, if you have been audited by DCAA, specifically for your accounting system, and if it is certified, again, you will have a record of it if you have it. Your contract that you have with the government will state that it's covered under CAS and that you have to set up the system. So if you don't have those documents, you are probably a non-traditional. And if you're a small business, you're a non-traditional because generally small businesses are not going to have a full CAS contract. You're generally operating under fixed price or time and material or expenditure based type work. You're not doing cost reimbursable, which is where CAS is generally required. And what I will say too is if you're going through your contracts, definitely talk to your legal team and your finance team. They're going to be the ones that really know, because there's also reporting requirements that come with CAS systems that you have to be aware of.
Perfect. That was a very nice overview of
Yeah.
who actually gets to be one, which is almost anybody.
Yes.
There's another really good question here. Is there a resource to see a list of all OT contracts over the past 5 to 7 years? Like, is there somewhere that just kind of puts everything together, no matter where, they came through? Or an opportunity to get a holistic view of the consortiums and non-consortium use of OTAs?
Yeah, so depending on which agency you're looking for, certain agencies have it in their statute to report it in FPDS, which is public, which sometimes gets transferred over into usaspending.gov. So you can find it there as well if you don't like how FPDS looks. I like FPDS because I like spreadsheets. I don't need all the fancy stuff. I like to clean the data myself and do all that. Again, I'm the nerd here. I totally get it. But Department of Defense, it is their requirement to make sure that they report all of their prototype OTs in FPDS, whether they are agency awarded or whether it's through a consortium management groups on a consortia contract or agreement that they have. The key here is and I know what a lot of people are thinking is, well, if I'm a performer, how do I know that I get credit when I look it up in FPDS? The agreements officer, based on the latest, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, Congress made this edit, and in the guide from 2023, it says that the entity that is performing has to be in the notes when it's reported in FPDS. So they've addressed the congressional issue of how do we know who's actually performing the work. The way to identify if it's a prototype OT or a research and development OT is in the award instrument number, which most of you know that as your contract number or award number. The 9th digit, if it's a 3, it's a research and development OT. If it's a 9, it's going to be a prototype OT. There's no designation for follow-on because that is not a category that other agencies use. And a follow-on can mean a lot of different things for other agencies. So there's different language, but generally it's the two authorities are generally split between research and development and prototyping. And then it could advance into development or some other language like follow-on. NASA, I will say, if you're interested in NASA, they report it. It's in their statute. They have to report it on their website.
Perfect. There was also another portion of one of the previous questions that said, if somebody, like if a small business can't afford a membership to one of the consortia, what pathways are available to them? So from an ATI perspective, there are several consortia that are actually free to join, or some have like an option where it's like free for the first year, and then there's an annual fee afterwards. And it just kind of depends on where you fit, what technology vertical fits with which consortia. So one of the best ways that you can kind of take a look at all of those, we list all the consortia at govmates.com/OTA. That'll give you a chance to take a look there. And there's also the ATI.org website will give you all sorts of information of, where they are, what's happening, if they've got annual fees. I mean, a lot of the places, if you are a nonprofit or an academic institution, there may be an option there for, a free or reduced, depending on where you're trying to join. So it's my least favorite answer, which is it depends. There are options for access. It just kind of depends where you fit and who you're looking at and where that kind of goes. There was another question in there about somebody recently had a concept paper accepted within a certain consortium, and they're like, what are the next steps? Do we actively look for stakeholders while we wait for more information? Like, what happens next? Really, the only thing I can tell you for that perspective is to like actually reach out and be like, hey, what does the timeline look like? At the end of every email address at ATI, there is actually a human there. So you will get an answer from someone should you reach out to, their info or somebody who's on the website. All of those email addresses have real humans who are going to get to be able to answer your questions, and they'll give you really specific information about that. I will also say it's never a bad idea to tee up partners, but until you get word otherwise, you're kind of in that wait scenario. So it might be nice just to kind of get the lay of the land of as far as how it works for your timelines, and that'll give you a little bit of a better opportunity to work backwards from there. Additionally, there was the question that said, do we have to join consortiums? And while necessarily the answer is no, it does benefit you because a lot of the opportunities come directly through the consortium management firm. So they will be given to the consortium management firm, the consortium itself, and then it will trickle down into those members. So if you are part of, IWRP, you're going to get specific opportunities that come through that are given directly to that consortium for, being able to accept proposals and things like that. So if you don't have to necessarily join, but it does behoove you to do that. And it also, working within a consortium actually takes a lot of that paper trail and makes it something that's easier to handle for a small business, because the consortium management firm is going to do a lot of that for you. They're going to kind of be that person that business that goes in between you and the client, so that you can really focus on getting that technology in the hands of, those who really need it. So it takes out a little bit of that other legwork. So while the answer is no, the bigger answer is you really should. Yes, and they'll give you information, again, access to industry days, a lot of that matchmaking, other opportunities to connect and be introduced, and even others in the space that you can team with that you may not have met otherwise, because these go all throughout the country. So it's nice to have the opportunity to meet some other like-minded individuals who are working on things that you might be able to team with in the future for other opportunities. So
And
hopefully,
Meg, can you drop the link in the chat for the
yeah,
master list of consortia so that people
yes,
have that?
I will
Um,
do that. We have this one here.
And while you do that, what I'll add, because I know typing on camera, you'll end up misspelling every single time. I will add that if you're looking for opportunities and you're trying to figure out what is going to be under a consortium or what is going to be agency direct, most of the time, the solicitation that gets posted is either going to be a commercial solutions opening, or it's going to be a broad agency announcement, or it might be titled something else like project announcement. And best practice is for the government to post it to sam.gov. Not everyone does it. What I have seen is a lot of the consortia solicitations are being posted on sam.gov so more companies can find it, and it's redirecting them to the website. Other agencies will post it on their website, post it to SAM, and it'll redirect them to their own website. So for example, DIU will post a lot of CSOs directly to their website, which sometimes they will post to sam.gov. Most of the fast moving ones generally will just get posted to the website. So right now there's best practices for how to advertise them, but because they're not necessarily subject to what our traditional methods of solicitation are based on what the FAR states, It could be hard to find based on keywords, but about, I want to say 80% of all solicitations that are associated with OTs are going to be posted as a commercial solutions opening, or they're going to be posted as a BAA, where the government's going to ask you, do you want to do an OT or not? The other benefit that you have when working with a consortium management group like ATI or some of the other ones is going to be if you have a customer that has money but does not have available agreements officers to support, they could always leverage the government agency that is supporting a specific consortium for that technical area. They might have an interagency agreement or something along those lines. And as we know this year, a lot of our agreements officers and contracting officers took the deal. They're retiring. They're on their island enjoying non-contract speak. That's okay. It's expected. But in the meantime, if you're looking for ways to work with your customers, find a pathway. This is a tool in your toolbox. Obviously, it's not guaranteed, but it is a pathway for you to help leverage and see if there's a membership or something, or if there's someone that you can team with in that consortia that might be applicable to you. And the member lists are generally public. So if there's a company you've been itching to work with, or if you're talking to someone and you want to see if they're a part of that specific consortium, you can go in and you can look on, for example, on ATI's website for the member list for each consortia and find a company that you might be interested in working with and ask them, what is it like? Is it worth for me to member? Is there something that you're tracking as an opportunity we can team on? I want to experience this. I want to try it. It happens all the time, especially with the 1 to 2 people firms where they might not be able to afford a full membership, but they want to be able to team with someone. And there's usually some flexibilities in that depending on what the requirements are for each consortia. The other thing that I do want to make sure that everybody is aware is a consortium does not equal OTA. There are FAR-based consortia that exist. So when you are looking at them, make sure, and on their website, they'll be very clear if it's FAR-based or non-FAR-based. Make sure that you're checking that, because what you don't want to do is just apply to all of them that you think you fit into, and then find out that you don't qualify maybe for the FAR-based one, or you don't meet the requirements of it. And that's where the consortium management group will help you determine that as well. They're there to support you, which is why this model is great. And it's something that the government does look at as a value add. So the trend is growing. It's not like the importance of consortium management groups is going to go away. There's new ones being stood up almost every single week, and solicitations are again being posted for them. It is bid season for everyone. So we know that there's going to be more coming based on the strategic focus areas that the government is looking for. So make sure that you're keeping up to date with what's out there. And right now, you know, LinkedIn is your best friend. Those industry days, hackathons, all of those types of events, pitch events are going to be ones that you want to attend and listen to how government is structuring their acquisition planning, especially in the next fiscal year.
I know you and I talked a little bit about this offline, but how do you see teaming and collaboration evolving in OTA, given the fact that there's not a lot of regulation around subcontracting, things like that? How are we seeing teaming evolve going forward?
So what I would say is, if you're working within the Department of Defense or any agency that leverages a Department of Defense authority, there are specific requirements when it comes to who's performing. So there's terminology like you have to have at least one small business or one non-traditional, and it's mostly related to cost shares where people pay attention, because cost share is always the hot topic when it comes to the statute. But it also has a lot to do with how you arrange your team. And remember that every performer on that OT can perform the follow-on work. So if you have a team of 3 companies and they're a performer on that OT agreement, they are going to be able to be part of that success memo that they're going to get to then continue the work for the work that they did on the OT, depending on what the government wants to continue working on. Generally best practice, just like in any arrangement that you have when there's multiple people, you want to pick a team lead. So instead of having what we would say as the prime in the traditional sense, when we talk about traditional contracts, here you will have a team lead that is not necessarily the one that is significant participation, as Department of Defense describes it, or the one that is doing the majority of the work, which might be on another statute. Your team lead, pick the organized person, the one that's going to keep the team contained, is neutral, and is able to have really good communication skills that can bring everyone together, have those conversations with the government, and make sure it keeps your work on track. But you could have a team that somebody's only doing 5% work on, somebody's doing 90%. You can split it different ways, where in traditional procurement methods, we have a very strong line of 51-49% of what the prime and what the subcontractors can perform. Or if you're a large business, you have to have a small business participation plan. Again, under the current FAR, maybe not under the new one later on, but we do have specific regulations when it comes to traditionals. So again, make sure that you know what kind of contract or agreement you're doing this under, especially if you're working with a consortium management group on a specific consortia. But generally for OTs, think of it as you are bringing the best people together. You're still having those discussions. You should have a teaming agreement. You should have a subcontract or a sub agreement with those companies, depending on what kind of work that you're doing. Make sure you're clear on the work share, who's responsible for what, how are you invoicing, what compliance. These are all best practices on the commercial world as well. You have suppliers in the commercial world that you're bringing in, and you want to make sure that they're doing their stuff. They're making sure that they're delivering what they promise. So there's still best practices that apply, but again, we're going to be using different language, different terminology for those types of things. But essentially, I don't think that there's going to be massive changes to how you make those arrangements. I think that people have to understand that they do have to think creatively, and you can remove a team member if you need to and replace them with someone, just like you can with subcontracting.
Perfect. And then do you have any examples, or can you share any examples of any small businesses who that have successfully scaled or expanded their footprint using a consortia, and what contributed to some of the things that they did well or how they found success?
Okay, so I was trying to find some specific examples.
Like you might not be able to name anybody, and that's okay, because sometimes you have to
Yeah,
be that
and that's the
quiet.
problem because I don't have
Yeah,
access to their specific agreement. So I'm just going to go with a very general example that I think is also a really good example in terms of how different agencies work together to come to fruition to a commercialized thing that we all are very familiar with, which is the COVID vaccines. These were funded across several agencies that have OTs. And actually in the Department of Defense, when I was doing my dissertation research, one of the largest OTs, which was in the billions, was written under the Department of Defense for COVID. So it can be high dollars. It does not necessarily have to be one specific agency that's doing it. A lot of organizations come together. So Department of Commerce, for example, supports a lot of work across the federal space. And they have an OTA that they leverage for that, and they're trying their best to set up their reporting in FPDS so that they can also report the same way Department of Defense does. But the COVID vaccine, the beauty of it is that you saw how much 20 years of research has really contributed, and now BARDA. I believe they've already stood up, I think it is through ATI, their consortia, to help prepare for the next pandemic. So we're starting and using those use cases again now, with preparing for what might be happening in the future. So just like in the early 2000s, we were like, oh, better prepared than sorry. And good thing we were prepared in 2020. We were able to work through that vaccine quickly because of the work and the flexibilities that we had already established. That's, to me, is one of the biggest success stories. I think that not only were there 3 different vaccines that were developed from that research, we were also able to use a lot of that to help build up the foundation that we have now. And BARDA has been instrumental in that.
that's one of my favorite examples too, actually. Just one of my favorite stories to think about, and the fact that it's so recent. I mean, it feels not recent, but it is so recent, right? And something that really made a huge difference here. I do have just a couple more questions for you before we sign up for today. So if anybody has anything else that they want to make sure that they get in and get asked, make sure you put that into the chat or the Q&A now so that we don't miss it. But we did have a question come in about neo consortia that I don't know if we have time. It might be a larger discussion, and if it does, that's okay. Talking a little bit about OpenAI, SpaceX, Anduril, and they're kind of opening up things that are trying to make the pathways easier to get to solutions, but it doesn't seem like we're able to join those. Is that true? And how are they serving the government differently is the question. I don't necessarily know that they're consortia per se as much as they're like teaming groups, but I could be wrong. Do you know anything about these?
I don't know anything about these. What I will say is there's a big how do I put this? So the opinion of consortia is a very polarizing one, just like the federal acquisition regulations versus OTs can be a polarizing conversation. And all of it has to do with the goodness factor of, are we actually performing the work? So a lot of organizations have stayed away from a consortium model. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if like OpenAI, Palantir, SpaceX have consortia set up, because consortia is not um, Department of Defense specific or federal government specific. Academia has consortium models. State and local use them a lot for different initiatives. The thing to keep in mind is, what is the structure and how are they being leveraged and how are they benefiting their members? So it is not a one size fits all definition. So what you see how ATI operates their consortia does not mean that is how, let's say, the state of Nebraska is going to operate their education consortia. So if they do have them set up, they might be under a similar model or the similar structure with consortia. Some of them are setting them up as marketplaces. So marketplaces, you may see like AWS has announced a Cyber Phase 3 marketplace, or that was recent on LinkedIn. You might have heard of Trade Solutions Marketplace, DARPA Eris, or Platform One Solutions Marketplace. All of these are also leveraging, how do you break down the barrier of entry for new companies that are on the precipice of something new? Because again, the whole issue with the defense industrial base and the government being a good client, or a client that people actually want to work with, is to make it an appealing model. So if the consortia model is not something that's appealing to companies and they're pushing back, Congress hears that and they come up with other initiatives that may be helpful. Rebrand the idea. That happens a lot, right? I hear different terminology for different things. You'll hear innovation networks, for example. I've seen that get thrown around, or love a good ecosystem. Okay, everyone has an ecosystem too. That's another name that has been thrown around. And they're set up with the same outcomes that we may want to see with like the marketplace model or the consortium model. So if they do have them, I now have something new to research. So thank you, Brandon, for posting that as a question. I'm going to be digging into that this week. But I wouldn't be surprised that they have them. I'm sure they're standing something up in order for them to have better teaming.
And I think it might be a little bit on the line of the system integrator piece, where they are putting together, they're trying to access, right, different
Mhm.
technologies and bring people together in order to win some of these, contracts that are coming out by way of, smaller groups or the marketplace that you kind of talked about. So I think the difference that we've seen between a consortium management firm like ATI is that they don't perform directly for any of the government contracts, right? They're the middle in between that helps to link the two together. Whereas like an OpenAI or, something like that will perform directly. So that will be a big difference there. So you will be
Yeah.
working, you would be working with them if you're part of their team versus, having somebody to kind of help hold the hand and guide the work as it comes down the pike. And
Yep.
that's a bit
Yep.
different. So um,
Yeah, and I see the question from Claire about setting one up.
yes.
So if you're trying to set one up, you have to have a government sponsor, or you have to be set up in order for you to hold it. There are solicitations out there right now that the government has to see who can help stand up certain consortia. There's a lot of nonprofits that are looking to set them up as well, especially any kind of nonprofits that may be supporting small businesses and advocacy for small businesses to provide them a path. But it's usually based on a very explicit technical area or need that the government has in order for you to support that. So you'll see some of it will be for tanks, and you're like, how many tanks can the government actually have? Well, it depends on what they're supporting for tanks. Is it software? Is it equipment? And I know that's a very like big, broad idea, but there's one for shipbuilding. There might be one for submarines. There might be some for, we hear a lot about contested logistics. That's a big one. So making sure that you know who you're targeting, who your client is. If you're interested in setting it up or bidding on one, make sure you look at what the requirements are that have been posted, because that'll give you an idea of, do you qualify to be able one of the managing organizations that have one.
Perfect. Thank you. And the last thing I kind of want to ask you is, what is one piece of advice that you would give a small business that's ready to move fast, but feels a little bit overwhelmed by the federal acquisition process?
My advice is take it slow. It's okay that it seems overwhelming. I would also be very careful with when you are seeking consultants, when you're talking to people to bring on to help you through the process. Make sure you qualify them for the type of work that you want to seek, and for type of support that you actually need. There's a ton of free resources out there. There's a ton of webinars you can follow. I know GovMates has a lot of resources too. I post a lot of resources on my LinkedIn and on REXOTA's LinkedIn and we have them on our website too, of resources you can leverage, download anytime you need. Do not pay for something that is public. The DoD OT guide, for example, that's public. You can find it, you can download it. You can read it. If you have questions, there's point of contacts in there. You can reach out again to GovMates or myself for help, or your consortia management group, whoever that might be, to ask those questions. And then also just remember, if you're trying to figure out how are you going to take hold of the entire federal space, don't find a customer that you really want to target. So you have to do your own market research. You're not going to want to do business with the whole army. The whole army is not going to be your customer. It's going to probably be a few PEO offices within the army. And the Army does list out what each PEO office does. And if those are based on what technology solution service that you have, target that customer, go to their industry days. Don't try to take on the whole world. Start small, win the small work. Sometimes the prize challenge that's only $5,000 can lead up to a $10 million contract in the end. So take those opportunities, because not a lot of people are, and start small with what you can manage.
Thank you very much. I did put up some of the information if you would like to reach out to Dolores or myself, or if you have ATI specific questions, something that is a little bit more wider reaching, happy to answer any of those. As we said at the top of today's hour, we will be sharing the replay as well as the slides. I will include both of those when I do the wrap up after it has processed and posted. If you do want additional resources, or we do have other ATI focused webinars that we have done before and recorded, and they're all on our YouTube page, our GovMates YouTube page, if you'd like that. But Dolores, thank you for being here and for answering all of our questions, as well as thank you to everybody in the audience who joined us. We're, as Dolores said, we're also on LinkedIn. GovMates is, I am Dolores's, REXOTA is. They're all there. I did put the REXOTA link into the chat as well, so that you guys can get a hold of that and not have to look for it. We are quickly approaching, as a reminder, our virtual matchmaking, which is on July 10th. So if you're interested in matchmaking, you can actually just email ati@govmates.com. Let us know. We'll make sure that we get you the link to get everything set up for that, so that we can make sure to include you. And then if you find you have additional questions post-webinar, you took some time to think about it and you're like, hey, got some more to ask, please let us know and we will be sure to get you an answer ASAP, or I will direct you to the correct person to give you the best answer. And otherwise, again, thank you. And we hope you have a great rest of the week. And we look forward to seeing you either online or in person at one of our upcoming events. So have a fantastic week, guys.